Alright, we're on Causes of the Civil War Part 3. I'm sorry, I'm just doing a little stretching before I get this one done. We're going to start off with the Kansas and Nebraska Act. The Kansas and Nebraska Act basically says that the Kansas and Nebraska, they're going to use popular sovereignty to decide slave or free. Now, popular sovereignty means the people get the right to choose. The people choose. Examples from the Constitution would be we the people, the consent of the governed. Both of those are examples of popular sovereignty in the Constitution. Now, the fact that the Kansas-Nebraska Act says Kansas and Nebraska will get to choose, the people will get to vote, it causes a craze. All these people rush to Kansas, and it leads to something called Bloody Kansas. To Bloody Kansas. Okay, next, John Brown. John Brown is a white abolitionist. What color do I want to use? Well, you're probably shouting at the screen trying to tell me. I can't even hear you. John Brown is a white abolitionist. He's a white abolitionist who wanted to aid a slave uprising. Wanted to aid a slave uprising. And I apologize if that's wrong use of the word aid, because I'm not entirely sure right now. It's a white abolitionist who wanted to aid a slave uprising. So he breaks into a federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. He breaks into a federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. An arsenal is where they store weapons. An arsenal is where they store weapons. He is hanged for treason in the South. The North considers him a martyr. He's hanged for treason. North sees him as a martyr. Now, a martyr is someone who dies for what they believe in. And so they see him as this man who died for what he believed in, and they believe fervently that this guy, we should have more guys like John Brown. If only there were more guys like John Brown. Now, finally, we're on Lincoln. Lincoln gave a few famous speeches. Before he even ran for president, he gave a speech called A House Divided. Lincoln is an abolitionist, but in truth, he didn't really want to abolish slavery. He supports the abolitionist movement because he doesn't necessarily agree with slavery, but he doesn't really want to get rid of it. He says he just doesn't want the spread of it. It's still not enough for the South to trust him at all. But he is an abolitionist who really believes, at its core, a house. He's very famous for quoting this: "A house divided cannot stand. A house divided against itself cannot stand. A house divided against itself, a house divided cannot stand," which basically just means, I'm just going to do 3 little dots because it's not exactly the quote. A house divided cannot stand. We cannot be all slave. We can't be half slave, half free. We either need to be all slave or we need to be all free. But a house divided against itself cannot stand. When he came into office, his main goal, his main purpose, he wanted very much He wanted to preserve the Union. That was ideally what was going to happen for him. He said, I'm not a super fan of everything that's going on here, but I want to preserve the Union. He did not want to break the bonds of affection. Lincoln wants to preserve the Union. He doesn't want to do anything that will necessarily upset the South so much that they leave. But the last straw leading to civil war, Lincoln's election, oh geez, if I could spell, Lincoln's election leads to, da-da-da, Lincoln's election leads to Civil War. Actually, technically, it leads to South Carolina secedes, which leads to war. So technically, let's get rid of this one, because Lincoln's election leads to the secession of South Carolina, which leads to Civil War. Okay, make sure you study your notes, make sure you go over your review sheets that you received, and happy studying. Good luck on your test tomorrow.